Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore the unused, altered, and unseen content in gaming. So it's been nearly 7 whole years since I first covered the original Nintendo 64 Paper Mario here on the Lost Bits series. So yeah, I guess you could say I've put this video off long enough. But with the 1000-Year Door remake just around the corner as I release this video, I can't not cover it now, right? Anyways, there's so much content to cover for this game that I'll be splitting this into at least 2 parts, but for this first one, we'll dive into some pre-release stuff, as well as a bit of content unused in the final release. So with all that said, get a paper cut on that like button below. It's time to dive into one of the most iconic Mario games of all time and find some lost bits. Alright, so let us first kick this video off by going over some pre-release aspects of Paper Mario the 1000-Year Door, or more specifically, Paper Mario 2, as it was known when it was initially revealed to the world. And for starters, we have the initial reveal trailer for the game that was shown off at E3 of 2004. And of course, like I've just mentioned, initially the game was revealed with the subtitle-less name of Paper Mario 2, with the logo being straight up just the logo from the first game with a 2 added to it. And this of course was revamped quite a bit for the final version. This reveal trailer then cuts to when Mario first enters Petalburg, and here a few notable differences can also be seen. First, the inn here is seen rocking a sign with a toad instead of a bed as is seen in the final. Similarly, we can see an old texture for the item shop's Fire Flower graphic here too. And then, actually seen in several pre-release instances, is that the soles of Goombella's shoes were originally visible in her design. And this is actually true for all Goombas seen in the game's pre-release footage, build, and screenshots. Why the decision to make the Goombas soulless was made isn't quite clear. Then next, the build in this teaser also shows a ledge in this room near the 1000-Year Door with an HP Plus badge on it, and both the badge and ledge itself were cut from the final game. We can see that the tornado jump is listed as Hurricane Jump here, likely misspelled since the word hurricane had too many letters to fit. And then Red Bones here was initially just referred to as the much simpler Red Koopa Skeleton. Now, thankfully, this trailer wasn't the only aspect of the game that was shown off at E3 2004, as there was also a demo that seems to have been available for showgoers to test out, featuring 3 sections from the game: Star Crystal Field, Hooktail Castle, as well as Boggly Woods. Starting off with Star Crystal Fields, which was actually renamed to Petal Meadows in the final release. Probably the most interesting thing from this early build is that it seems to have had some text made up specifically for it, which was removed from the final cut, and that's this bit of text at the rocks that hide the pipe entrance to Hooktail's castle near Petalburg. In this picture taken by Andrew Goldfarb, who was at the event, we can see that the text would read, "Ha, I'm not telling you my secrets at the show, wait for the final version." And although there's no gameplay recording of this online, at least to my knowledge, I'm assuming this would pop up if the player tried to hit or interact with the rock containing the pipe here. Now obviously, Nintendo didn't want the demo to reveal too much of the game, but I just think this exclusive bit of text is really cool, and I love that it breaks the fourth wall. Also, I just gotta say, this giant Paper Mario 2 poster from the E3 event is awesome. I wonder what ended up happening to it. Now, although gameplay video of this E3 build is unfortunately hard to come by, a pair of screenshots reveal a few more small differences. For one, it looks like the main door to Hooktail's castle was originally going to have a big lock on it that was later removed. And secondly, this early screenshot of the Great Tree appears to reveal that the ground here originally lacked the colorful gradient that's there in the final cut. Although there weren't too many changes seen in this build, E3 2004 was only like a month away from the build date of the initial Japanese launch version of the game, so I think it's pretty interesting to still see this many changes so close to release. After this, an early demo of 1000-Year Door was actually included in the interactive multi-game demo disc version 17 and 18 game in North America, as well as in the Gekken Nintendo Tentao Demo 2004.7.1 disc. Now, if you didn't know, these discs were basically used in kiosk displays at various retail locations back in the day to show off new demos and trailers for the latest Nintendo games at the time. And yes, this makes me feel incredibly old. The demo on this disc still has the Paper Mario 2 working title, and also contains a bunch of differences from the final release. What's extra interesting about these differences is that despite looking like it's from a much earlier point in development, this demo was apparently built on June 21st of 2004, putting it only a few days before the build date of the Japanese launch version of the game. Anyways, in addition to just the game's logo, obviously the rest of the title screen is quite different here, as we can see Mario running in place with the first 3 partners encountered in the game with a very basic static background. The final version is also static, but way more fun and colorful. Then getting to the actual gameplay here, this demo contains the same 3 areas to check out that were available at E3 2004, and in those areas we could also note several differences from their final counterparts. These differences include absolutely no save blocks in any of the playable sections here, which makes sense since the demo only has a 10-minute time limit until it resets. General White here wasn't included in this demo build. The dull bones are referred to as Koopa skeletons. X-Nauts seem to have had an early name of Boomer Gangers. You can't check this sign in the Petalburg shop to see your points progress. Some furniture in Mayor Kroop's house lacks any shadows. The Happy Heart badge near the top of this pipe that you can use Koops to reach is missing in the demo, as is the horsetail item, which in the final game you can get by spamming this candy pop with a hammer 10 times. Then probably the biggest change is that Goombella not only doesn't tell you about her tattle function just before Petalburg, but also if you ever do actually try to use it in an area, instead of giving you actual info, Goombella will just say, "Normally, I'd have some witty and insightful tip to share with you here, but I'm saving it for the final version." And while we're on the topic of text strings, in addition to some of the enemy names I went over earlier, there are a whole bunch more that are different in this demo. These include Petal Meadows being referred to as Petal Plains, the Crystal Stars being the Star Crystals, General White being referred to as White Shogun, despite again not being included in this demo, Toast Tea was originally Dane Tea, Life Shrooms were Emergency Shrooms. I mentioned the Crystal Stars being Star Crystals earlier, but in one string they were also referred to as Star Stones. 2 hours here became several hours, and many, many, many more. Now obviously, in the interest of time, I can't go over all of these here, and many of the changes are more minor, but as always, if you're interested in reading up on all of them, definitely head on over to the Cutting Room Floor page, which I'll have linked for you in my sources in the description below. Anyways, next up, the demo build also has some early graphics which differ from their final counterparts, including the strange sack being slightly bigger in the demo with an equally slightly differently colored strap. The graphic for the banner in the Japanese demo not only uses a different font, but also lacks all the characters. The game's icon is also different, having Mario facing left with a yellow backdrop instead of facing right with a blue one. The champ's belt here is almost completely different, lacking the gold star, and just overall looking more like a wrestling belt. The graphic for getting star points for finishing a battle uses a different font, and honestly, I think it looks better in the demo. Well, it's mostly different. It looks like the number used in the final one retains this original font. And then the backdrop graphic for Hooktail Castle is slightly different, with the only differences being the addition of a cloud line near the trees on the bottom here, and then an addition of a little curve on the cloud up at the top right corner. Now, both of these alterations appear to have been made in order for the texture to tile better when copied horizontally. Otherwise, using the original texture would result in it looking a bit awkward when tiled. And then last, but certainly not least, the W emblem was purple in the demo instead of yellow as it's seen in the final build. Based on this, it's believed that originally, instead of having to equip both the L and W emblems, there may have been plans for the W emblem to give Mario Waluigi's clothes instead of Wario's. Now at first I thought this might have been another case of Waluigi getting the short end of the stick, but I guess the W does make a lot more sense for Wario. Then next, moving on to the audio side of things, there are a pair of tracks that aren't heard normally in this demo. This includes an early version of the track that's played in the game's opening, which doesn't get used in this demo as that portion of the game isn't included here. Let's give this early version a quick listen and compare it to its final iteration. And then secondly, the other unused track in this demo is one apparently meant to have been for an event occurring in Petalburg. Next up, we went over the altered graphics earlier, but there are also a pair of graphics that are left over completely unused in the demo as well, and these both feature early Japanese names for Creepy Steeple and Twilight Town respectively. The one for Twilight Town is less of a change, going from Usugura Town to Usugura Mura, both meaning essentially the same thing, I believe. And then for Creepy Steeple, the demo name here of Daimujin was changed to Odoronjin. Daimu apparently translates to dime, and Odoron derives from the act of being astonished, and with Jin translating to temple, I guess it was changed from Dime Temple to the temple that astonishes. Then after all of these currently known pre-release builds, interestingly enough, a screenshot from a pre-release build can actually be seen in the instruction booklet of the final release in North America. On page 30 here, we can see this screenshot of Mario and Goombella in the Trouble Center building. And here we can see that this was again from an earlier pre-release build where we can not only once again see the soles of Goombella's shoes, but more importantly, we can also see almost a quarter of the floor being broken here, which isn't seen at all in the final version of this room where the floor isn't nearly as much of a safety hazard. Now that's about it for the pre-release stuff, at least for content that isn't found in the final game. So for the last part of this video, let's now go over the various unused graphics in the final cut of the game that appear to be leftovers from earlier points in development. First, we went over this a bunch already, but in the final cut of the game is this sprite of Goombella with her shoes, of course, rocking some visible soles. And while we're talking about Goombas and their souls again, found amongst the textures for XS Express is this section featuring Mario, a Toad, as well as a Goomba who is also soul-full here. Then we got an early animation of the star that's seen in the game's text boxes to prompt the player to move on to the next bit of text, and this early one kinda like bounces instead of just blinking and rotating back and forth as is seen in the final version. And then more on the enemy side of things, we have several early graphics for the Smorg enemies. First we have these two fellas listed as CMOAA and then CMOAB respectively, with also an animation of this one scuttling. Although they don't look similar at all to the final Smorg enemies, the Japanese name for the Smorgs is Moa Moa, so the name seems to check out. And to further support this, in the files, the Smorgs are referenced as New Moa 2. And although these specific colors went on to be unused, the design itself was seemingly reused for Screamy, one of the partners that joins Luigi in the game. So thankfully, this design didn't go fully unused. Anyways, next, there's also another early version of the Smorg sprite where the edges of the gases are smoother compared to the final version, and this one is referred to as Test. Then next up, there are also several early graphics for the Koopa Troopa, including sprites for an animation of some flapping wings that appear like they're sketched, and then we also have this very early looking design for the Red Koopa Troopa, where they look angrier, less vibrant, and overall the style just looks less polished. And to add to this early design, there's also this texture of just the Koopa's shell in that same style, where the coloring just doesn't seem right. And no, that isn't an editing or rendering issue or anything on my end, the graphic really does have all of these pixel stragglers all around the shell. And then similar to this style, left over in the game are also some very early sprites of Mario himself. It kind of almost looks like a stage in between Paper Mario's design from the N64 game and Thousand Year Door. And as much as I like the final design of Mario that we got, this early design does have a whole bunch of charm too. And then also for Mario, we have this texture with him on a star pattern background, and here we can also see a slightly different design for him, as the boots are a bit different, and the colors are slightly darker compared to the final design. Next, there's an early design of Vivian where it's mostly the same, save for the fireball on the hat here. But then, on the other hand, we also have an early design of Admiral Bobbery where he looks almost completely different. His mustache is different, he has both eyes visible, and I guess the design would originally have him less so an admiral, but more of an army bob-omb, as gone is the admiral cap and ship wheel, and instead he rocked a camo beret and what looks like some fins on his back to, I guess, help with his aerodynamics. Oh, and yeah, his soles were also visible too. Then, as far as early item designs go, we have an early design for the can, where the less polished design sports some brighter colors, the line goes vertically along the can instead of horizontally, and it's flipped around. Looks like originally, the X-Nauts in the audience would throw bricks at the player instead of rocks. We have some early designs of the sun and moonstones, where they appear slightly bigger and also seem to originally have had the more basic, sketched-like design. Similarly, there's also an early version of the Star Key where it's gray instead of more yellow, and it also used to have eyes. And then lastly is this red key that seems to resemble Hooktail. There actually doesn't seem to be an equivalent to this key in the final game, so this may have been intended for that one lock on the door to Hooktail's castle that I went over earlier that was seen in that one pre-release screenshot. And then lastly, we have a bunch of early miscellaneous as well as user interface graphics. These include early versions of two of the ability icons, where the papercraft on the icons were originally seen yellow, the paper airplane had a slightly different design and faced the opposite direction, and then the paper mode icon just looked like a slightly bent piece of paper instead of the S-shaped icon seen in the final. There are early graphics for the Japanese name for Glitzville, where instead of Oolong Town, it was romanized as Uron Town, and interestingly, this name actually isn't fully unused, as even in the North American localization of this game, during the segments where Mario travels to Glitzville in the Cheep Cheep Blimp, if we zoom in closer to the miniaturized model of Glitzville, we can actually see it still using the Uron Town name here, and this early fresh juice sign can also be seen there too. Then, also left over in the final cut of the game, is the early design of the Fireflower shop sign that we also saw in the E3 trailer earlier. And finally, moving on to the graphics for the game's battle sequences, more interesting early leftovers include some slightly different action lights, where the shine on the top left here was originally yellow instead of white. We got early action command graphics for mashing the A and B button, as well as for moving the control stick, each which rock a different art style. Similarly, there are early sprites for the hand cursor, two early graphics for the Switch icon, one which just uses a different design for the Y button, and then one that reveals that the L button was once intended to be the button used to switch instead. Then we have early graphics for each of the icons used on the battle menu, where, much like many of the other early graphics, like those for Mario we went over earlier, they all rock that same more basic sketch-like style, with the shoe, hammer, and fireflower looking particularly different. We got early graphics of the partner health icons, in which they lacked the accompanying heart seen in the final versions, and they all seem to just be heads removed from the base character sprites instead of an actual unique sprite. Oh, and yeah, we can also see the early designs for Admiral Bobbery here too. And then lastly, similarly, we have this set of sprites for the menu for switching Mario's partner. These again just seem to be squeezed down versions of their regular default sprites, as we can see Koops looking uncomfortable here to say the least. And honestly, the chibi, more stylized sprites that were made up for the final game were an awesome addition, as they have all that extra Paper Mario charm that this game just oozes. And my friends, we'll wrap it up there for this first part, and I hope you enjoyed. there is still lots to cover from the final cut of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, so stay tuned for that in the near future, and be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell to find your way back here when it's posted. Till then though, check out some of my other Lost Bits videos, and as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I will see you in a bit.